compliance best practices for collections. All lines will be placed on mute to prevent any background noise. Thank you. Karen Daniels, you can begin your webinar.
Thank you. My name is Karen Daniels. I am the account executive from Noble Systems, and today with us, our panelist expert is Todd Langwish, who is the president and CEO of TechLock. Todd comes to us with 25 years of experience in privacy, information technology, and information security. Most recently, his last endeavor was he was the Chief Information Officer for one of the largest collection agencies in the country, where he also went through one of the first CFPB audits, which was in Q2 of 2013. So we're lucky enough today to have Todd help us and walk through with us a number of compliance information things that are happening in the space today. And what we're going to do today is just a quick overview of what we're going to cover. We're going to do, obviously, a compliance overview. We're going to review a managing compliance and certifications, and then the technology solutions to support many of these. So, Todd, I'm going to hand it over to you at this time.
Great. Thanks, Karen. Appreciate the warm welcome, and good afternoon to everybody, and maybe it's good morning to a few of you, depending on what time zone you're in. Briefly, as we get into any compliance discussion, whether it's for TCPA or data security, or et cetera, note that this information that we're providing is not intended to be legal advice and may not be used as legal advice. Legal advice must be tailored to the specific circumstances of each case. Every effort has been made to ensure that this information is up to date at the date of the publication. It's not intended to be a full and exhaustive explanation of law in any area, and that should not replace the advice from your own legal counsel. Just want to get that little legal disclaimer out of the way, since we're going to be talking about quite a few different laws and regulations and so forth. But once again, thank you for joining the call and taking time out of your busy days. Today we're going to talk about compliance overview and collections, which is going to touch base on quite a few things here, but in general categories, just from a data security perspective, dialing controls, policies, and procedures. When you look at compliance, sometimes you get a little more granular than that, but with the recent news releases and unfortunate extra read all about it, we want to make sure that we're covering some of the big ones here, just to share those best practices, as well as hopefully help reduce your risk. And on the next slide, you'll see that when we talk about compliance, I'm going to break it down into two areas. Security of data, and obviously everybody's seen what happened with the recent large retailer in Minnesota as of late, as well as even large banks when it comes to regulatory adherence for TCPA or state dialing restrictions, and share some of my own insights during the CFPB audit I went through, as Karen mentioned, in Q2 of last year. I had the privilege to sit down with about 12 to 14 members of the CFPB for a little over 2 months, going through one of the first ones, as well as an auditor and ACA International instructor. I help folks with CFPB preparedness and compliance in general. On the next slide, why is compliance so critical? As I mentioned, with people in the news, it's a huge cost, right? It's a cost of doing business, because you got to make sure that you're following the appropriate rules and regulations. But it's a huge liability or risk to the organization as it relates to the penalties and fees. If we look on the slide here, just up to $16,000 per violation for TCPA violations, or as you've seen in recent state fines that have passed, you can have upwards to $500,000 repeated violations. But mostly, you have class action lawsuits, which can be the huge detriment, which we'll see coming up in some of the slides. I'm sure everybody saw the recent one that we'll talk about briefly. The public relations damage, whether you're doing third-party servicing for an entity or if it's first party in your own collections that you're doing, it can become a public relations nightmare for you. There are, on the data security side, certain safe harbor areas that we'll talk about when it comes to fines, like even from a data security perspective. You have one of the largest breaches that just happened for a retailer, and it's happening for collection companies and hospitals and every organization, financial institutions, restaurants, so forth. And there are some safe harbor clauses that organizations can take care of, as well as some high-risk red flags that can, if you don't avoid them, can increase the number of class action lawsuits or even fines that you'll face. So what does today's harsh reality look like? Well, we saw recently, I'll jump down real quick to the Capital One lawsuit where it was a $73 million class action fine. And you know how this always goes, right, where there's a certain percentage set aside for the attorneys that file the class action and achieve the number, and then the rest gets dispersed throughout the class. But in my humble opinion, it's usually the attorneys that are filing that class action lawsuit that make out the most, and not really the consumer. This is a huge money maker for the legal environment. And I'm sure you've all seen varying results from different districts throughout the U.S., the lack of consistency, and people scrambling to set up different solutions that will meet the loophole. And some of the questions that have already come in, as it relates to, differences between first party, third party, and other items, we'll get to a few of those. But in general, one of the items that people always ask me from a compliance standpoint is, what do we need to do to be compliant? And there's always going to be that line in the road because compliance is still going to have that gray area. And it's just how close do you want to get to that line, as it relates to how many attempts are you calling somebody, if you're calling cell phones or not, calling cell phones and so forth. And there's going to be the conservative, and then there's going to be to the line. And each one is going to have risk and rewards, right? You're going to have maybe higher right party contacts or more success, that you feel because you're closer to that line, leveraging your full technology platform and leveraging different communication methods and how frequent you're calling somebody and where they're located at. And then, you may have higher risk that somebody could latch on to you and start getting information about what you're doing, how you're doing it, and then poof, you got a class action. In the end, you look at addresses and names, when you look at credit card numbers, et cetera, all information is key. And recently there's been a huge shift to, if you remember the old bank robber Willie Sutton, when they asked him, why he robbed banks, he said, well, because the money's there. And the U.S. Secret Service Director, Ralph Basham, just recently came out and said, information is the world's new currency. Everybody is going after names, addresses, socials, phone numbers, email addresses, like the Epsilon email security breach. Everybody's trying to just gain access to the information and control that information or acquire it. To date, we have over 867 million records that have been compromised. You can go to privacyrights.org and view their trend. They do all publicly available ones and track it. And they've done this since the Choice Point breach back in February 2005. And with the 46 state data breach notification laws, they do a pretty good job at being able to gather information on when somebody does have a breach or has an issue. New, more sophisticated threats. One of the items that I just wanted to pass along to you guys, because I'm seeing a high uptick recently in healthcare and collections for data breaches or issues. Even data breach aside, organizations that are getting malware in their environment that and being held ransom, where once a certain piece of, it's called a crypto locker, malware gets in your environment, it then encrypts all of your information that it can get access to with your credentials or that person's credentials that allowed them in. And then you get a note that pops up on your screen that, if you want the encryption key, that you have to pay them a ransom. And there's no way to recover. Once it's encrypted, it's a strong encryption. The only way to recover is through a tape backup. But more importantly, as it relates to some of these advanced persistent threats, the old days of just having a simple firewall or antivirus, etc., that all goes away. When you have large public companies that deal with security, like Symantec, that has a large revenue base for antivirus, and they say, hey guys, we just, we're a public company, we sell this, but antivirus is really no longer effective. It only catches 45% of the cyber attacks, right? It's a reactive tool, and once you catch something, it's only effective less than half of the time. And that's key to remember when you look at Ponymon's cost of a data breach. And depending on what area you're in, so as an example, like the U.S., it might be around $214 per account for a cost to you from a data breach perspective. By the time you do the data breach notification, by the time you help that consumer with their identity theft protection and so forth, the money starts adding up in addition to the public image and the public affairs issue that you have to deal with. But you have large security companies like even RSA that have been hacked themselves, and whether you're a large security company like RSA or like a favorite story I tell, the Mel's Diner in Broussard, Louisiana, it could be just a little diner, small shop with one POS system, one point-of-sale system that's taking credit cards, and because you have a PC connected, that somebody is able to gain access to those pieces of information, and then all of a sudden, you're facing fines up to $500,000 because somebody was able to access that information. These advanced persistent threats are huge right now, and it's very hard for organizations to defend against them. Anybody that deals with their IT staff or their information security staff, you should ask them, who is attacking us today or right now? Because with 2 out of 3 home PCs in the U.S. infected, everybody has somebody knocking on their door. If your IT staff or information security staff cannot tell you where you're being attacked from right now, then they're not doing their job. They're not knowing, they're not in the know of who is attacking them and how to shut that off. Because we all forget that data is all ones and zeros, and there's a lot of things going on what we can't see on those cables and the equipment, right? We just jump on our systems or we dial and we work, but in the end, there's a lot of things going on in the digital side that we don't see. And if you guys have any involvement in your organization, you should see a risk-based assessment, internally of how you're being attacked, because you are being attacked right now, even as you're sitting on this webinar. Consumers are losing patience with data breach fatigue. We have 46 state laws for data breach notification. We have consumers that, as they move around and cell phones become the prevalent form of communication, that they're going away from their home number, and you might see a New York area code with somebody living in California. So you have the calling hours as well as their phone number itself and their name, address, social security number, et cetera. They're tired of not having their information protected, and they're tired of getting called at different hours of the day and night and so forth, as well as getting multiple calls from different devices, automatic telephony, dialing systems, and so forth. And so this all comes back around to us as it relates to class action lawsuits and new laws and new regulations. The collections world, the arm industry, is probably the most heavily regulated industry in the world today, aside from the banking side. Recently, you probably just saw too the FTC for UDAP, unfair and deceptive practices, that they just levied $2 million in fees against 2 collection agencies, one in Memphis, Tennessee, and the other one, I believe, I have to go back and look, and that was it was in Kentucky. And this has all resulted in creditors and issuers have stepped up their due diligence. So I have a lot of clients that are dealing with like the Wells Fargos of the world, which probably has the most intense review from a data security and compliance perspective. And then you have the other banking financial institutions right in line with new due diligence questionnaires and new on-site auditing procedures. So it's definitely a new world in today's harsh reality. On the next slide, as we look at who's governing these types of activities, we see that obviously the Federal Trade Commission. So you have any collection agency is deemed a financial institution and is therefore governed by the FTC, who oversees UDAP and data security and different banking regulations. Then you have the CFPB, which has been around about 3 years now and really started doing some of their audits. And as they work with some of their different departments, now they're starting to get that handshake process where, in the beginning I sat through several CFPB audits that, really dug down on service provider assessments, and it was all-encompassing. And they seem to have backed off a little bit on the data security side and just looked at how that service provider is acting on behalf of that client of theirs when it comes to calling, UDAP practices, and other items. And they still will identify data security or lack of service provider due diligence and pass that along to the FTC. But it seems now in the past few years that they're starting to work better with each other and have more communication. Recently, I just did a seminar with the FTC, the CFPB, and it was some clear delineation in their presentations on who owns what. And the example of the data security side, the FTC owns, and the CFPB in their PowerPoint and presentation also reiterated that. But they are still looking at service providers, but from a data security perspective, they're really involving the FTC and have been so for the last 6 months. Compared to when I went through my first CFPB audit, it seemed like anything went, anything goes, and as they looked through everything, that there might be some enforcement from them, but then they started involving other agencies. The Department of Health and Human Services recently just did a presentation with Ileana Peters from the Department of Health and Human Services. There have been some changes, as you probably have seen, aside from, the HIPAA, the HITECH Act, and the final omnibus rule. There's been changes in sort of endorsements when you look at the PCI DSS of healthcare, if you will, called HITRUST, where Texas just signed in, their law, the House Bill 300 for Texas, endorsing HITRUST as the healthcare data security certification. I mean, let's face it, anybody can get HIPAA certified or get a business associate agreement and pass administrative, technical, and physical safeguards that were designed in 1996. And when you look at the HITECH Act and the final omnibus rule, although they're putting higher onus on the business associates and they're increasing the fines, they've changed the definition of a breach and added low pro quo in other terms, as well as ensuring that people understand that a breach is assumed and now you got to do a documented risk assessment, et cetera. But in the end, they haven't really changed the data security requirements. So, when you look at technologies, even like virtualization that's been out for, 5 years, plus years, that the HITRUST data security will accommodate that, where the HIPAA administrative, technical, and physical safeguards won't. And it literally takes an act of Congress to make that change. And that's why this law has gone sort of stale. And, when you have two parties that can't even agree upon a budget, they're not going to agree on one federal data security law or changes to that data security side. You have various state regulations because the federal government is not able to get out, like one common data breach notification law, one common calling guidelines or policies, as well as even one federal data security law. The states are doing their own things, right? So when you look at your compliance program, you have to go state by state to really dig down and understand what are my calling time restrictions, right? You have California is the toughest, but you have various different laws in New York that you have to be cognizant of, and other states as it relates to time of day calling, et cetera. And then even looking at your number of attempts and what's harassment, what's not harassment, and so forth. And then on the data security side, again, you have different states coming out with their own laws. So although you have the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act safeguards rule, Massachusetts came out with their own on protection of consumer information. It's 201 CMR 17.0. Minnesota has their own around credit cards and the Plastic Security Act. Nevada did their own chapter of personal information security, NRS 603 Alpha, where they turned PCI DSS into law. So if you're doing collections or you have business in Nevada, whether you're brick and mortar or if you're just licensed or doing business in Nevada and you take credit card payments, it's mandatory that you are compliant with the most current version of PCI DSS. Texas, as I mentioned, House Bill 300 came out with their new healthcare endorsement of HITRUST, which has been around about 7 years. And again, it sort of takes it to the next level from the standard HIPAA and the business social agreements. Texas just says, hey, look, if you see, smell, hear, have access to protected health information, you're considered a covered entity. And the other thing that's really going on, to be honest with you, like when you get through all the black and white text, to me, I see that the state is charging, for that certification, that if you want to get certified with the Texas Health and Human Services, which some large medical organizations are requiring, it's approximately around a $2,500 fee for the state. So imagine, you get 10, 20,000 businesses that register and pay the state $2,500. It starts becoming a revenue generation vehicle for the state to get more money. And again, it's just going to be another cost of doing business. But recently in the collections industry, I've seen about 12 to 15 organizations really just jump on the bandwagon just this month alone to start their HITRUST certification. Looking at who's gone to the HITRUST conference that was recently HITRUST 2014 in Texas. When you have the Blue Cross, Blue Shields, WellPoints, Children's Medical Hospital, et cetera, when you have all these large organizations that are endorsing it, as well as the Department of Health and Human Services there for HITRUST 2014, it really has now sort of taken on a life of its own, similar to the way PCI DSS took off years ago. And even looking at what the Department of Health and Human Services is doing now in 2015, they're going to start auditing business associates. So they did a first round 2 years ago. They went out to some covered entities, and they did a sort of a, we're not going to prosecute you. This will be your one-time freebie. We're going to come out. We're going to audit you. And there was a high failure rate, to say the least. So now this year, they're starting their second round. Notices are going to go out towards the end of this year, and then on-site audits by the Department of Health and Human Services for covered entities as well as business associates start in first quarter of 2015. So that's going to be very interesting. And then, obviously, credit and issue requirements. Again, I mentioned earlier, Wells Fargo, U.S. Bank, everybody has stepped up their due diligence requirements, and they're coming on site with teams now instead of just the one person. There's plethora of Excel spreadsheets and questions and so forth. So it's really just a new game, and we've seen some people exit the industry already. The smaller guys, as well as some of the larger entities not wanting to do business with the smaller guys because they don't feel that they can have the full compliance management system in. And some of it's just, really dedicating the time and effort to get that set up and leveraging, even some free tools that are out there. On the next slide, when we look at, what regulations affect you. So you have all those governing bodies. And I think TCPA is a huge one in the industry, or a lot of industries. The Telephone Consumer Protection Act, will vary in what different districts and class action lawsuits that you'll see will come out with results, and then people will leverage that in other court cases and so forth. You know, the FCC has been reviewing the TCPA. You know, in my opinion, and everybody knows, right, it was never really meant for anybody other than telemarketers, but got morphed into it. And really, you know, you look at the definitions of an automatic telephony dialing system, and even banks on the you know, their own first-party side, you know, getting hit with these lawsuits for calling folks on their cell phones, and really that getting consent now is the key thing. And you know, I have one client that I help out, you know, from a CFPB preparedness as well as data security audits, and I mean, their inventory has grown to 78% cell phone inventory. So having the right scrubs in place to identify those, and then a solution in place that, okay, I can't use my, you know, dialer now, but I still need to maintain compliance with various state laws, or ensure that I do not call, or number of attempts, time to call recordings. And then what am I putting in place? You know, whether it's a regular phone system, and then worrying about compliance, or going out and buying sort of a manual solution that is compliant with TCPA. You know, it doesn't have the ability to say store numbers or do predictive dialing and so forth. But the telemarketing sales rule, various state consumer protection, do not call lists, as well as even, you know, again, number of attempts we'll get into, because you could have, you know, a consumer with multiple accounts in your system, and it might be under different phone numbers, so it depends on how you do your, you tie your accounts together and so forth. But, you know, the various state laws that you have to be cognizant of and monitor are key, because obviously the state AGs, it's a big money maker for them, political touch point to protect their consumers and bring the bad guys to light that are, you know, calling at all hours. So when we look at some of these items that are affecting you on the next slide, you know, we talked about do not call. You may get a cease and desist. You may get a do not call. You know, and how does your system accommodate that? You know, if it comes in, they put it in, you already built your list for the day. You know, does it number automatically, get taken out? That's key in the solutions. And well as your process, you know, when I did my CFPB review, these are all some, you know, key bullet points that these 12 to 14 members, you know, on site for, you know, 8 to 10 weeks evaluated. And then even the call recordings, you know, as they sat down and listened to the call recordings, and that's why they brought in such a large team. They spend a lot of their time just reviewing the calls, and having that, you know, speech analytics or call monitoring, like what you do. You know, because if you don't do speech analytics and you just do the call recording, you know, do you have a QA team that is monitoring these, and what percentage are they listening to, and what's your scorecard look like? How does that, you know, even tie into their bonus program, and, you know, what's your progressive disciplinary process, et cetera? And then looking at calling times. And I'll share with you, like, one of items that I've seen recently, you know, even at my customer sites, that you know, it's not just about, you know, the cell phone or the home of record. You know, if you're calling a POE, you know, and let's say it's an 800 number, but their place of employment is in California, and you call them, you know, 10 a.m. Eastern time, but at 7 a.m. Pacific time, you know, did you just violate the California calling time restrictions? So, you know, the CFPB will dig into, and they will try to digest that information from a business intelligence standpoint, where they'll give you data fields that they've requested, and, you know, you got the accounts, you got the numbers, the time called, length and duration of the call, et cetera. So they'll pull all this in and try to do some analytics themselves. And I think that's the key thing for everybody is, you know, if your system is not doing that today for you, and or you're not pulling reports from your system, you know, that's probably your biggest gotcha, because you never want to be surprised and have them come to you and ask you a question that you don't already know the answer to. So you have to be doing the analytics. You have to be reviewing who you're calling, when you're calling them, and even from a, you know, no matter what dialing solution you have today, you have to, even though you turn on the state restrictions or you put in state restrictions, you want to test that out and also do review on a portion of the accounts to make sure that the rules engine is 100% functioning all the time, and or have tight change control around that system to make sure nobody made any changes to it. In the end, you have to realize that no matter what tool you buy and no matter what how it is marketed as being a compliant solution, in the end, it's your tool from that point forward, right? And I'll take a high, analogy of worst case scenario. You buy a hammer, at a hardware store. You take it and you hit somebody over the head with it. Well, the hammer manufacturer, it's not their fault. You took that tool and how you wield it and what you did with it, that's on you. It was a compliant, non-lethal weapon when they sold it, but you turned it into one, right? So same thing with any dialing solution that you have is you want to make sure that just because it's a compliant solution, how you use that tool or wield it is always going to be key. And record keeping, what reports are you doing, if you're doing any business intelligence, any analytics, if you're doing the speech analytics with the call scorecard, or even just analytics on number of attempts that you're calling somebody to validate, by account number, by social security number, et cetera, by phone number, how you slice and dice it. What's your compliance management system look like, and you get complaints coming in, how those get resolved, and how you make changes to your policies and procedures. On the next slide, we talk about various regulations affecting you. Even consent for, call recordings, whether it's one-party or two-party consent, et cetera. You have to make sure that when you're doing your call recordings that that's in your system or it's in your policies and training with your staff. The CFPB, like I said, in my first review, there was a wide variety that they came in on to look at, and kind of all on their own. And now recently, say in the last 6 months, they really are pulling in other different departments to help them, as well as beefing up their own internal resources. I've seen some people from the Army Ministry now go over to the CFPB, which is a good thing, right, to help educate them, because even when they discussed a possible opportunity with myself, there's different areas within the CFPB and the enforcement, the rules, the advisory group, et cetera. And it's interesting on how they're starting to come together. And really, I think people envisioned when they first came in that there would be a lot of changes and huge impacts and so forth. And really, the first 3 years has been a lot of information gathering and looking at a variety of regulations and getting an understanding of how difficult it is sometimes to really call somebody. I mean, I have high hopes that someday, with the change in people's use of cell phones as their home numbers now, and what the TCPA was originally designed for on telemarketing, that and even help from the government, just from the student loan side, that we get changes that the CFPB can see that it's sometimes very difficult to help a consumer repair their credit or help a consumer resolve an issue that's at hand. And I'm anxious to see what's going to come on any rulemaking that comes out from all the information gathering, to say the least. On the next slide, just touching base on data security. On the telephony side, I see really a high 90% failure rate on a lot of organizations that don't catch protecting telephony-based data. Briefly, when you look at a phone call conversation, even if that organization is not processing the credit card, but they may be on a payment gateway's website somewhere else, they're getting the credit card information over the phone, and they're entering it in for the consumer, not on their systems, but a different one. That's still a requirement of PCI DSS, because one, the employee has access to it. Two, it's store, process, or transmit. You're transmitting that over the internet on your equipment, et cetera. But more importantly, too, if your system's not set up to, with a F9 key, FA, whatever, so there's not a hook to the system that you're going to enter a payment window and it shuts off the call recording, which also could be a little bit dangerous. But if you're capturing that cardholder information and it's in the call recordings, making sure that that call recording, those WAV files, or however the audio file is stored, is encrypted. And then you, in addition to having it being encrypted, you also need to have access logs on it and other controls, and a lot of people miss the boat on that. There's a great supplemental guideline from the PCI Security Standards Council on protecting telephony-based cardholder information. And it's, again, it's huge. It's a 90% miss for most organizations that I see that just don't understand how they're using their system or where people are storing WAV files or not, and so forth. And you really need to take a look at that from a compliance standpoint in data security, because we will see as we progress through the slides, one of the weak points for data security is always the servers, and I'll touch on that when we get there. On the next slide, some other different regulations, again, talking about wireless number restrictions. You know, the definition of an ATDS, automatic telephony dialing system, that you need that, you know, expressed prior written consent. And if you don't have that, that could be a violation of the TCPA Act. Therefore, a lot of organizations have sought out manual solutions that move away completely from the ATDS and do not, say, store numbers or have the predictive dialing capability, but still gives them the full compliance aspects that they need to worry about from the dialing, as well as call recordings and so forth. This is, obviously a huge item. A lot of organizations are scrambling to get patents on this for their manual solutions, and something that you need to review from your own risk-based assessment on how you dial and or contact consumers. On the calling or texting to the cell phones, again, here in the UK, a little bit larger use than the US from a risk perspective. Texting and or calling, again, if it's the person's cell phone, you just need to do your own internal risk assessment and also partner with your solution providers to understand what is compliant, what is the compliant configuration, and then manage and monitor that tool. On the next slide, just talking about expanding on the FTC a little bit and unfair deceptive acts or practices. This can be a hit for you on TCPA, it can be a hit for you on data security. There's 50-some cases out there right now that the FTC has fined people for millions of dollars, whether it's GenWise or other organizations, even in GMR transcript service, where they're sliding in a lot of different categories underneath that, where an organization shared data with somebody, and they didn't do a service provider due diligence, a proper one, and that doesn't mean that you ask them for a audit report like SOC 2 or SSA 16 or PCI DSS, and then you get it and you put it in the drawer, because that doesn't account for due diligence. But whether you're using hosting or cloud-based services, whether you're premise-based, whether you're sharing data with somebody from a scrub perspective, dialing perspective, etc., you want to make sure that from the FTC's perspective that you're in full compliance with all laws, whether it's data security or unfair or deceptive acts or practices. Big one that I see that a lot of people forget about is the red flags rule in the collections industry, making sure you have an identity theft program. Got, it's 26 red flags out there, but really only 5 really apply to collection companies. But the FTC has ramped up, along with the Department of Health and Human Services, their service provider due diligence aspect and the data security side, just due to all the breaches going on. On the next slide, a very interesting quote that working with the FTC recently, on the next slide, I thought one of the best things I heard from them, and was one of their attorneys, Melinda Claybaugh, was that a breach doesn't necessarily mean you had a lack of reasonable security, because there's organizations out there that have had data breaches, but you know what? They did do a decent job with encryption and other things. Maybe it was a malicious employee, but the risk assessment they had in place, they had an independent third-party audit. They worked with the auditor and made sure the audit was good to go. But in the end, you'll never have 100% information security. So you can do a lot, but then you can still have an issue. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you didn't have reasonable security. And more importantly, my favorite one is But no breach doesn't necessarily mean you have reasonable security in there. And one of the takeaways today, just remember, you can get a independent third-party audit report. And I've done 800 security assessments in the arm industry alone, and I've gone in there after banks have done their due diligence, and the client sitting there happy saying, yeah, I just passed flying colors. I come in there and I fail them for 20 things. And it's not 20 things that are my opinion. It's black and white. Because in the end, whether it's a bank coming in and doing their due diligence on you or an independent third party, most people will spend more time walking around their rental car checking for damage before they rent it than they will their own audit report. Just because it said they were compliant, they don't question it. Or if a bank sent somebody in there to do a due diligence, and the person spends most of their time looking at physical security, but not really the firewall or looking at some technical controls, they're happy. And a lot of people get a false sense of comfort, not to mention the SSA 16, which is starting to get a little bit more clarity for folks. But in June of 2011, the AICPA, the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, retired the SAS 70, came out with the SSA 16 to replace it for internal controls around financial reporting. But to ensure that people didn't misuse it like they did the SAS 70, they came out with the SOC2, the SOC 2, and the SOC 3. The SOC 2 is based off of trusted system principles. To me, PCI DSS is the best data security tool to use across your whole organization from a technical control perspective. But the AICPA released specific FAQs and guidance around the SSA 16 that, number one, you can't get certified in it. Number two, you can't market that to clients. Number three, it can't be used for data security. It's internal controls around financial reporting. So there's some really great information out there. People still don't get it. I crack up every time I see a press release that somebody says they passed the most rigorous data security standard out there, SSA 16, when that's not true. It's not even used for that, and you can't use it for that, and you can't get certified in it. But it'll take probably another 1 to 3 years for everybody to get on the same page. I mean, even creditors and issuers still have it in their RFPs going out, and it's really those people that understand it that can exceed client requirements and get ahead of their competitors, and then others that are still in that pack that are still clouded by it. But that'll get fished out here soon. On the next slide, just touching base on the CFPB again real quick. We'll talk about their goals. They really are trying to prevent harm to consumers while promoting good practices that benefit them, whether it's the UDAP, whether it's data security. They've released a lot of service provider bulletins. They are doing a lot of information gathering. It's been 3 years. They trying to get as many people as they can that are knowledgeable about the arm industry and other areas. They have a lot of financial banking folks, but not really on the collection side. But again, something that I've seen that's been great in the last 6 months with some clear delineation on what other departments like the FTC have governing authority, like the UDAP or data security like the FTC, that the CFPB will identify it and pass it along to their companies or departments. On the next slide, just a quick, hey, what's on the 5 o'clock news? We look at organizations that don't have proper information security in place, like a debt collection in Tinley Park, Illinois, whether it's the large retailer Target, whether it's medical institutions, like the one in Illinois where 4 million people had their data compromised because 2 PCs walked out the door, et cetera. This is happening every day, whether it's on telephony platforms, whether it's on collection systems, whether it's hosted providers. On the next slide, you'll see why all these keep popping up. And this is really just, like I said earlier, it's been a huge uptick in the last 6 months. It's been crazy on the healthcare side as well as collection agencies that are getting in the 5 o'clock news or having data breaches and then having to do their own investigations and risk assessments. But this is, Verizon and the U.S. Secret Service publish a report every year. The statistics change up a little bit on how they present it. This one's from the report in 2012. The 2014 one is out. There's some really good information. But, when we look at servers, 94% of all data compromise involves servers, whether it's your dialer whether it's your collection system, no matter what the case may be, servers are generally the least hardened systems because when you harden something, it breaks. So sometimes you have to work with your solution provider to make sure you have a hardened configuration that is compliant, but then still works. But again, 2 out of 3 home PCs are infected, and a lot of people are just not following simpler intermediate controls like PCI DSS. Forget PCI DSS just from a credit card perspective. Take all 250 technical data security requirements and apply that to all data in your environment, whether it's phone numbers, social security numbers, credit card numbers. You will be far better from a risk reduction perspective following the PCI DSS than you will any standard out there today. I can tell you as whether it's Sallie Mae, Asset Acceptance Capital Corp, that was always our core data security principles that helped us. On the next slide, we talk about managing compliance and certification. I'm just going to jump to the next one, partial list of the acronym SUIT. When you're talking about a collection agency, whether you're in collections, whether you're in healthcare, whether you're in student loans, different states that you collect from, I mean, how do you get this all in one audit report? You can't. You have to look at holistic information security. I mean, we even ran off the slide here in the presentation on state dialing restrictions at the bottom. But when you talk about data security and you talk about dialing, TCPA, UDAP, et cetera, it's all encompassing, highly regulated environment. What are you doing to ensure that all these bullet points and others are covered, right? That's the key. What are you doing on your checklist, and who you're partnering with to make sure that you got the right solutions in place from the right vendors, as well as the right auditing partner to ensure that you're not going to end up in the 5 o'clock news. Real quick on the next slide, what's compliant versus certified? Again, you can buy a solution from the vendor that's compliant, but when it gets in your environment, it may not, be so much compliant anymore after you make changes to it. And or what's certified? Like, you might have a Noble Systems hosted solution that's certified because somebody came in, assessed them, say against PCI DSS, validated it, right, to gather the evidence, and then that auditor is certifying them that they are compliant with that standard, versus somebody just saying, like you might see from a medical asset collection perspective, if someone says they're HIPAA compliant or they're GLBA compliant or so forth, but are they certified that somebody came in and is putting their name to it because they gathered the evidence, they followed the auditing guidelines and practices, and then gave them an audit report. On the next slide, what you can't get certified in, again, just takeaway for you here, you can go Google this, but you can't get certified in SSA 16. This is from the organization AICPA. You can't market it to anybody. And again, this is one of SAS 70 was one of the most misused auditing standards, unfortunately, and that's one of the reasons why I got retired June of 2011. But don't get confused or stuck by what the SSA 16 is. There's a lot of great information out there. I'm not going to read the slide to you, but just note that, again, you can't get certified in it, and it's not for data security. Next slide is just the URLs, the links to it, that you can go to the AICPA, pull it up yourself, and then, again, use it as a competitive strategic advantage that you go out and get a holistic information security audit or compliance audit. Best is like you get an auditor that knows CFPB, readiness, and data security, and then you get certified, and then you're able to present that to your client exceeding the requirements, and you'll be in the top 95% of all, you'll be one of the top 5% of agencies out there or organizations. On the next slide, talking about protecting telephony-based info, again, this is a supplemental guideline that you can go and pull from the PCI Security Standards Council. You want to track, like do a data flow diagram, where your calls are being stored, what's being stored. Is it non-public personal information like names, addresses, social security numbers? Is it payment information like a credit card? Who has access to that call recordings? How is the information protected if it's encryption? Because if it's encrypted, you can get a safe harbor if it's strong encryption like triple DES, AES, et cetera. How information is being accessed and how it's being logged. So if a systems administrator or an employee goes to it. And what's your data retention policy? Like some people just store it and keep it for 5, 6, 7 years. And that's fine, but most of the time, 95% of the time, they don't have a documented data retention policy, or they don't have a documented state dialing policy. Policies are a key thing to start with, understanding what you need to be compliant with, and then going down from there. On the next slide, just talking about what's detection and prevention. When we talk about that advanced persistent threat, and we talk about even surprises on compliance, the CFPB asking you questions because they did some business intelligence or analytics, or on data security side, when you look at threats into your environment on the data security side, there's a lot of different equipment out there that's available today. To me, from an auditing perspective, as well as managing my own risk at some of the largest companies, no auditing standard requires you to have tools that review your logs, right? You can get by and say that, something generates a log or alert, and then we review it, and the auditor has to accept that. But it's not humanly possible to review hundreds of thousands or millions of logs, alerts a day. And there's tools out there like the Security Information Event Management tool that can do that for you. Even the next generation firewalls out today have a lot of combinations of intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, and so forth. And then, again, tying this into compliance management, understanding how you're dialing, how you're calling. Like, what's your detection method if you dial outside of a state, calling restriction, and how do you prevent that go forward? Everything goes hand in hand with compliance, whether it's data security or dialing. On the next slide, just touching base on this detection and prevention with common issues in the arm industry. So a lot of times when I walk in, and this is off of 800 assessments, we see that a lot of times annual updates are done right before a client like a bank comes in, or they're getting their annual audit done, or owners are exempt from company policies, whether it's installing software or mobile access or whatever the case may be. When you have policies, you want to make sure they stay up to date. Make sure that it's not something that you do on an annual basis just because it's that time of the year from our perspective, that you're looking at on a compliance management system as complaints come in, if there's changes that you have to make in your environment, and then document those accordingly. It is kind of crazy out there where, customer experience is really a big thing right now. I've seen that shift in the last year where, an agency may have lower numbers, but the customer experience is high, and they're the #1 ranked agency. So whether it's treating the consumer fairly, whether it's the experience that the consumer has with that third-party agency, et cetera, that's really starting to pop up there as #1 over even revenue collected. Data security culture, you got to build that employee awareness. In the end, they have access to the data. It's key that you spend the time and train them accordingly. That will be your largest return on investment in any security avenue that you go if you do that with the employees, as well as even from a compliance management perspective, to ensure that the employees are trained. I've seen policies come out from a dialing perspective in other areas that the employees never get trained on. Lack of IT talent or resources. A lot of times, the PC techs are the data security guys, as well as even compliance or dialing experts. That's never the case from a success standpoint. Sometimes you need outside expertise, whether it's your vendor or your solution provider, going to them, or other auditors that or companies that may help you get that knowledge and systems expertise. I've seen a frequent use of the PCI quarterly scan certificate that owners think they're PCI certified because they have a scan certificate, but that's only one of 250 requirements. It's requirement 11.2, but you got 249 more to go. One of the #1 areas is really bad third and fourth party due diligence, whether it's hosted providers that they use from a dialing perspective, letter vendors, attorneys. People that do their litigation, FDCPA lawsuits, et cetera. Nobody ever does a security due diligence on that attorney, and that always dumbfounds me. But it's no wonder why they end up in the 5 o'clock news because of that fourth-party breach that they had. No data flow diagrams, which just delineates where their data goes, where it's stored, who has access to it. No hardening on systems. One of the PCI Verizon data breach statistics, when you get anywhere from 94 to 98% high issues in systems not being hardened is one of them. It's always something to take point of. No log review, again, not having that SIEM tool, just having the IT staff review the logs, which it's just not humanly possible, or lack of encryption throughout the entire network. All right, switching gears a little bit, we'll jump ahead 2 slides to dialing. Just some things that you want to have on your checklist, because the CFPB will have if they come in there, as well as creditors and issuers. Do you have a dialing policy? Will that dialing policy have max number of attempts, time restrictions on it? Safest time to dial. Does it look at 3 of 3 fields or 2 of 3? Like, does it just look at area code and zip code? Does it look at the address, etc.? And the max number of dialing attempts could be, is it based off of phone number? Is it based off of account number? Is it based off of social security number, et cetera? Because you could have somebody with multiple accounts, multiple numbers, and end up calling them like 9 times in one day. A retry or redialing policy. Are we validating with reporting our dialing compliance? So again, your tool may be compliant, but you always want to make sure that nobody's modified or changed the tool, and the tool is acting as it should or behaving as it should. If you're doing any Reg E, any checks over the phone or recurring payments, et cetera, a lot of people are starting to leverage their IVR to leverage that unified communication platform from a revenue perspective as well, because there's a lot of things that you can do with that tool, but people just don't know it. Are you doing TCPA compliant calling through a manual solution, your PBX, and if you're doing your PBX, how are you dealing with compliance, call recordings, speech analytics, et cetera? On the next slide, just talking about that EFTA Reg E, we've set up for some of our clients the IVR to capture an e-signature on a recurring check payment, something that people didn't think about, but it works great because you're already invested in that technology and it's fully compliant, vetted by several different attorneys and even some departmental agencies that have come in and looked at it. A global dialing policy enabling a dialer can help protect your organization from dialing out of compliance. So if you set up that rules engine and you come back to what you're doing from a policy perspective, it can really lower your risk versus and leveraging a manual dialing solution versus utilizing just phones or not having a full policy or not keeping it updated, and what mechanisms you use to keep abreast of changes. Again, that reporting. So again, whether it's business intelligence or reporting, how are you validating what you're doing and how you're doing it? You don't want to be at risk for additional lawsuits. Just touching base on the next slide on speech analytics. When it comes to your call recordings, and again, this is where the CFPB, 12 to 14 people walking into your shop and being there for 8 to 10 weeks is interesting, but having all these folks come in to do your call recordings, you should compare that with how are you doing your monitoring of the compliance from a call recording perspective. Are you leveraging a tool to do that for you? And even from a revenue generation perspective, that you can use that speech analytics absolutely for compliance, but if you look at your bell curve and you have your top revenue producers, what keywords are they saying, and what are your average to sub-average ones not saying that, as you create your scorecard, you can have it for compliance, but you can also have it for revenue generation as well. On the next slide, we talk about contact center compliance roadmap. Are you utilizing your current platform for its full capabilities? I've had some clients that just purchased a telephony solution they put in place, they smile and dial, but they don't really look at it for, like I said, Reg E, EFTA compliance, skills-based routing, or compliance risk reduction aspects, or leveraging any outside assessments for dialing practices, procedures, and how can they market that and turn that around to a strategic advantage or an RFP bullet point or two to gain more business, but certainly reduce their risk from a compliance perspective. When you develop your roadmap on the next slide, again, just reiterating that organization-wide dialing policy, you want to sit down and make sure you have this fully documented and then agreed upon across the whole organization, and then put that inside your rules engine for your solutions, or identify the gaps if your solution can't do that. You got the state compliance, safest time to call, validate your technical controls are meeting defined policy, looking also at the data security, data flow, the hardening of that equipment, and so forth. And then, the compliance management system should be built so that you can readjust as needed and review the capabilities of your contact center platform from a compliance as well as revenue generation perspective. All right, turn this over to Karen, since I've done a lot of talking, just to touch base on some of these items like campaign management, Noble compliance solutions, to talk about the Noble solution and how it can meet some of these needs.
Thank you, Todd. So we just want to take just a few more moments just to reiterate a few items that many of you have probably heard of us talk about before, but how the Noble platform can help you to meet these compliance challenges. As all of you know, Noble Systems provides a unified communications platform. Part of that platform includes a campaign management tool, which, as you can see on the screen here, it will help you with that call scheduling, the time zone management, many of the things, the abandonment rates, the call detail reporting, all these things that you are components that you typically don't want to think about because you want the tool to do it for you. The campaign management tool of the Noble platform has this functionality in it. And if this is something that you're not real familiar with, as a follow-up, you can reach out to your account executive, and they can certainly help them get you in touch with the right folks that will assist you with that. We also have the tools to support the agent workflows, which is going to allow folks to create the scripts to guide the agents to manage those compliant verification processes. The other one that we've seen a lot of is personalized agent Miranda recordings. Obviously, that's very important, and those are some components that we've seen in the agent workflow. And then the compliance management, it's really about having the views and alerts and the monitoring to let folks know when you are falling out of compliance. The other way to manage that is also through real-time speech analytics. PCI-ready solutions, Noble Systems, as most folks are aware, the Noble solution is a PCI-ready solution. What we're doing is in our hosted platform, we are providing a fully PCI solution. In our premise-based solution, we are providing you with all of the tools to support a PCI-ready solution if that's something you choose to do, okay? And that, again, I'm not going to read every line here, but as you can see, those are the components of that. And then last but not least is the Noble TCPA compliance solution. Noble does have a patented TCPA solution to support the dialing of the wireless numbers. As many of you have probably heard most of our team speak of, what we're doing is we're helping you to maintain the compliance that you're getting today out of the campaign management component today while still being able to make the telephone call from a system that does not have the ability to store randomly dialed numbers. So you are not, in essence, you are going to be able to support the law of the TCPA's law. Okay, again, these are all components to help you to better arm you with the tools to allow you to meet the compliance challenges in the industry today, many of which Todd just reviewed with us. At this point, because we are, I believe, over past 2 o'clock, at this point we are going to bring this to a close. If anyone does have any additional questions that you would like us to answer, if you could email our marketing organization, we will definitely follow up with everyone and make sure that everyone receives answers to all of the questions that were out there. Okay, thank you very much, and I hope everyone found this beneficial. Thank you, and have a great day.